This is a story of a hungry, hungry Rome. Rome was once a small city, but had a huge appetite. Rome went off and ate what is now Italy, and some islands, but he was still hungry, so he took over Egypt, taking control over the Mediterranean Sea. But he was still hungry, so he kept on taking over until he eventually took over the rest of Europe. Now, Rome had too much to handle, so he decided it would be best to split into the East and West. The West had some problems that led to its fall. Political reforms, a weakening economy, social breakdown, pressure and reliance from Germanic tribesmen all played into the disintegration of Western Roman Empire.
During the Pax Romana, there were healthy trade networks, steady inflation rates, few wars, and the barbarians were mostly kept out and in check. In short, the Roman Empire was thriving.
After the stability of Pax Romana, Rome experienced problems with money. This problem occurred for multiple reasons. Germanic tribes started to grow stronger and started attacking the Roman Empire. This caused the empire to spend more money repairing the damages caused by the Germanic tribesmen. In addition, plague significantly reduced the number of people to tax and reduced the amount of skilled labor available. Finally, if the army was not getting paid enough, they would rebel, which caused the empire to lose more funds. Roman emperors often raised taxes and debased coinage in an attempt to get more money, but this caused inflation to wreck the economy. Now the people and the soldiers would be unhappy, and the empire would be in a worse financial situation than it was before. To make matters worse, when soldiers are unsatisfied, they often rebelled, which caused more trouble in the economy. Diocletian was a Roman emperor who took the throne in 285 AD and got into power through the army. Diocletian passed reforms in order to fix the 3rd century crisis, but these reforms also led to numerous problems that were related to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Diocletian passed reforms regarding the army. During his rule, more barbarians were recruited into the Roman army. The barbarization of the army would lead to more problems later on. Diocletian also passed reforms to help the failing economy. Since the government did not have a lot of money, he allowed taxes to be paid in things other than money. He also fixed maximum prices and wages and made it so people were locked in their professions, even if their jobs were not providing them enough money. Diocletian divided the empire into a tetrarchy to make Rome easier to rule. He split the empire into a western and eastern half, and each half was ruled by an Augustus, which was an emperor, and Caesar, which is sort of like a junior emperor. This system was stable when Diocletian first implemented it, but began to cause problems later on. Constantine was the emperor that ruled after Diocletian, when the tetrarchy that Diocletian created began to fall apart after Diocletian's reign, since the 4th Augustan Caesars did not want to share power. In 305 to 324 AD, the tetrarchy started to fall apart, and there was a civil war in the Roman Empire. Constantine won that civil war. Constantine passed multiple reforms. For example, Constantine created a new gold coin. This new coin led to many problems for the Roman Empire.
It's used to a self-perpetuating expansion and a study of income of new resources. However, Rome stopped conquering like they did in the 1st and 2nd century, which meant that Rome had to use the accumulated surplus. The government plan was very costly. To compensate, taxes were raised extremely high and even extended to orphans and widows. When taxes rose, people were not making enough money to sustain big families and cover taxes. Farmers who could not pay taxes went to jail, sold their children into slavery, or abandoned their homes. As a result, the population decreased heavily. The extreme decline in population also led to fewer peasants, which meant goods and buying power decreased, which meant taxes would rise again, and so the cycle continued. A large economic problem for the West was a lack of money or income.
A variety of reasons, including the population, caused government income from tax to decrease. When the government was unable to pay high-ranking officials in money, they were often paid in land or favors. Compared to money, these payments were very hard to keep track of, which allowed officials to lie and claim they had been given land that wasn't theirs. High-ranking officials were also able to claim land or goods for private use under the guise of using it for the benefit of the public. Another bad economic decision was the officials' lands being exempt from tax. Not only did this decrease tax revenue, but it also allowed for more fraud and tax evasion. One tactic that was used often involved farmers gifting their land to high-ranking officials. The farmer would still work on the land and pay a share to the officials, who technically owned the land, but they were just doing it to make it tax-exempt.
Inflation is the general increase in the prices of goods and the lower purchasing power of money. Before 250 CE, inflation rates in the Roman Empire were stable. Salaries had enough time for the buying power to remain constant. However, starting in 250 CE, the inflation rate went up really fast, 700% between 267 and 274 CE. Part of the reason for the increased inflation was that the mining industry couldn't produce the same levels of precious metals. A possible reason for this is that the population decline left fewer jobs than before. In any case, the lack of precious metals called for emperors to mint more coins to keep the same amount of money in circulation. The emperors also needed to mint more coins to be able to support the growing bureaucracy. Having more money in circulation without having the goods to represent the extra money means that the prices of all goods must go up. Thus, the massive amounts of extra money the emperors had to mint led to rapid inflation. In such a short time, the wages would not have had time to compensate for increased prices, effectively leaving the people with less money. This led to increased poverty. It became more difficult to save enough money to satisfy the tax collector. Soldiers were in a position where they could demand higher pay, because if their demand was not met, they could simply abandon their posts. Wages were often the subject of military rebellions. As the currency of the empire was in trouble, Emperor Diocletian created new silver and gold coins, argenti and auris respectively, to exist with the existing coins, the denarius. Later, Emperor Constantine created another type of coin, the solidus, while maintaining Diocletian's. All of the new coins were much more valuable than the denarius. The ratio of a denarius to an auris was 1 to 833.3. That ratio serves as an example for how bad the old coins were and how strong the new coins were. Naturally, the government would want its taxes to be paid in the better gold currency. Because the government interacted with the elite families, they also used the better gold coins. Meanwhile, the poor were still using the failing denarius. The different coins used split the economy into the rich and poor, dividing the people of Rome. The volume of trade Rome was engaging in decreased, especially after 235 CE. The disintegration of the Parthian and Han empires disrupted trade in Asia Minor and East Asia. Trade routes to India were abandoned, and trade with North Africa all reduced the trade volume of the Roman Empire. In addition, coastal raids and the fall of the Rhine-Danube border disrupted trade in the northwest sector of the empire. Decreased trade is bad for the economy because there are, for one, less chances for merchants to make profits. They are not getting foreign, exotic items. They are stuck with what they have already in the empire, decreasing the interest in trade, repeating the pattern. A contributing factor in the Roman Empire's declining trade volume was the decline of agriculture at home. A major component of trade is the transportation of agricultural products such as wine, olive oil, and grain. If Rome produced these types of goods in reduced quantity, they would have less to trade abroad, partly explaining the decrease in trade. Barbarian raids and depopulation account for some of the decline in agriculture, but these two factors cannot account for the deterioration of an entire industry. Roman soldiers were often sent to repel barbarian raiders, but the soldiers would often fight amongst themselves, destroying a farmer's crops and allowing the raiders to steal livestock and supplies.
Diocletian splitting the empire in two, the west was put at disadvantage, and the east was relieved of a large burden. Before Diocletian split the empire, wealth, population, military came mostly from the east. The west got the short end of the stick with a smaller population, most of their land being marshes, and a smaller military, and a larger border to defend against Germanic tribesmen. They had to defend 500 miles of both the Danube and Rhine, from multiple barbarian tribes, while the east only had to guard 500 miles of the Rhine. The east also had to protect themselves from Persia, but Persia was a single political entity and easier to negotiate with. Due to depopulation caused by various plagues and civil wars, and the population decrease from the east-west split, the west had a smaller army and increasingly depended on barbarian recruits to supplement their army. As the composition of the army became increasingly filled with barbarians, barbarian generals gained more power, barbarian kings and kingdoms started to spring up within the empire, conquering new lands opened up by depopulation and shifting power away from the emperor. There was also Germanic tribes who were getting more organized as tribes started to band together, making them a more formidable enemy. Many factors caused the West to be more vulnerable to barbarian attacks. Their weak protection of their core allowed barbarians easy access to their capital and core cities after the border was breached. The East had Constantinople, a very secure fort that defended the rest of the empire from the frontier. When the Visigoths were given an offer to settle in Rome, they got into a skirmish with local officials, Adrianople, and killed the emperor. After that, the Visigoths settled with no opposition and were never kicked out. Eventually, Emperor Theodosius agreed to pay them in exchange for troops participating in their army.
It was clear to see that Rome was taking a turn for the worst. To turn things around, the government created new laws stating that workers must stay in their field of work for life, and the generations to come must also stay in the same field of work. While this law may have been the right choice in theory, it actually backfired to a decline in motivation to work, which is bad in the long run.
Throughout the process of the Western Roman Empire's disintegration, the political structure became more and more fragmented, with several barbarian groups controlling their own area of the Roman Empire. Germanic tribesmen collectively referred to the people north of the Danube and east of the Rhine. There were several smaller groups, Vandals, Visigoths, and Saxons to name a few, but even these groups include many smaller tribes. While some might say that the Germanic tribesmen invaded Rome, threatening the political structure, this explanation is incorrect. For one, Germanic tribesmen had been coming into the empire for a while with no negative impact on the empire. In reality, it was the Huns who invaded from the east and pushed into the territory of the tribesmen. The tribesmen came into Rome seeking refuge, not as invaders. In the 370s, the Visigoths came into the empire after being pushed out of their land. They were exploited by Roman soldiers. As a result, the Visigoths revolted, defeating the Roman army and killing the Eastern Roman Emperor. Many more barbarian victories would be won. By the 480s, the Visigoths had sacked Rome and carved out a sphere of power in Spain. The Vandals had revolted, sacked Rome again, and created their own kingdom in North Africa, and the Franks had established one of the most powerful kingdoms in Gaul, killing the last Roman governor in the process, with many other barbarian groups splitting up England. Thus, when the Roman Empire was nearing its end, several barbarian groups had independent control of their territories, and the government had very little control, if any.
The weakening of the emperor and increasing power of the local elites was a cause for the fall of many empires, including Rome, China, and Persia. In Rome, the core, or the emperor, slowly became a puppet as barbarian kingdoms emerged. In Persia, satraps, which were leaders of provinces in Persia, eventually gained more power and independence than the emperor. Similarly, in Han China, the emperor's power weakened as the power of generals and Confucian magnates increased. Eventually, the Han Empire and the Persian Empire fragmented, which is similar to how barbarian kingdoms emerged in Rome.
Includes the story of the hungry Roman Empire with its many faults that led to its fall. After the Pax Romana, a domino effect of small problems that started around the same time snowballed into bigger problems that caused only the western half of the Roman Empire to disintegrate.